The wind had no mercy in Oymyakon. It never did. At -71 degrees Celsius, the air itself became something solid, something hostile, something that pressed against your skin like 1,000 needles driving inward all at once. Breath froze before it left your lips. Metal cracked. Trees split open from the inside, their trunks exploding in the night like distant gunshots that echoed across the taiga with no one left to hear them. Even the silence in Oymyakon had weight. It sat on the chest of anyone brave or foolish enough to be outside, and it reminded them, without words, that this place did not belong to human beings. It never truly had. Natalia Ivanovna Sorokina had lived in this village for 73 years. She had been born in the same wooden cabin where she now slept alone, the same cabin her father had built with his bare hands before the Second World War had taken him east and never returned him. The cabin sat at the edge of the village, separated from the nearest neighbor by nearly 400 meters of frozen ground and a curtain of black spruce trees that swayed in the Arctic wind like mourners at a funeral that never ended. The walls were thick, reinforced over the decades with extra insulation, old blankets, and newspaper pages from the Soviet era pressed between layers of wood. The single window facing north had been sealed shut since October and would not open again until May, if the season was generous. Natalia was not a woman who complained. Her face told her story better than words ever could, deep lines carved by decades of cold and work and grief, pale blue eyes that had watched husbands and neighbors and old friends disappear into the earth one by one, hands so callous they could grip ice without flinching. She was small in stature but enormous in the way she occupied a room. Even alone, even in silence, she had a presence. The kind that comes only from surviving things that should have broken you. She had outlived 2 husbands. Her only son, Dmitri, had moved to Yakutsk 20 years ago for work and called on birthdays and holidays when he remembered. Her daughter-in-law had never liked the village, had never liked Natalia much either, and that feeling had been mutual and unspoken for decades. There were grandchildren she had held only a handful of times. Photographs of them sat on the wooden shelf above the stove, their faces slightly faded now from years of smoke and lamplight. She did not dwell on loneliness. Dwelling was a luxury. In Oymyakon, survival demanded full attention. Each morning began the same way. She woke before 5, while darkness still pressed completely against the cabin walls. She lit the wood stove first, always first, because without heat the morning would become dangerous within the hour. She boiled water for tea. She fed Pechka, her old gray cat, who had been her most consistent companion for 11 years and who slept curled beside the stove with the devotion of something that understood what cold truly meant. She ate kasha with a small spoonful of jam she had preserved herself from the cloudberries she collected every August. She dressed in layers so thick she moved like a bear through her own kitchen. Then she checked the thermometer nailed to the exterior wall beside the front door. That morning, the red line had stopped at -71. She had seen worse. Not often, but she had seen it. She crossed herself, said a short prayer to no saint in particular but to the general idea of mercy, and went about her business. There were logs to bring in from the covered pile beside the cabin. There was ice to melt for water. There was the small chicken coop attached to the back wall of the cabin to check, for hens remained alive, and their warmth depended on the heating lamp she had installed years ago after losing an entire flock in one brutal January night. She was on her 3rd trip between the log pile and the front door when she heard it. Not the wind. She knew the wind in every register it used, every frequency, every mood. This was different. This was low. A sound that did not come from the sky or the trees but from the ground itself, or from something standing on it. A sound that moved through the frozen air with a weight and intention that stopped her mid-step, her arms full of birch logs, her breath crystallizing instantly into a small white cloud that hung motionless in front of her face. She turned slowly. At the edge of the tree line, perhaps 30 meters away, something enormous stood in the darkness. The single exterior lamp above her door threw a pale cone of yellow light across the snow, and at the far edge of that light, she saw the shape. Massive. Low to the ground despite its height. Shoulders broader than any wolf, any bear she had ever encountered in her decades at the edge of the taiga. And the eyes, 2 amber circles, perfectly still, reflecting the lamplight back at her with an intelligence that was not animal in the simple sense of the word. A tiger. A Siberian tigress. Standing at the edge of her world, in -71 degrees, staring directly at her. Natalia did not run. Running in this cold, in these boots, in these layers, would accomplish nothing except exhausting her before the animal reached her. Instead she stood completely still, the logs heavy in her arms, her heart beating with a slowness that surprised her, and she looked back. The tigress did not move either. And then Natalia saw it, a detail that changed everything she thought she understood about what was happening in that frozen, silent, impossible moment. The animal was limping. The tigress took one step forward and collapsed. Not the collapse of a predator preparing to strike, this was the fall of something exhausted beyond the limits of its own magnificent body. She hit the snow with a sound like a heavy coat dropped onto a wooden floor, and she stayed there, sides heaving, breath coming in short visible bursts that dissolved instantly in the brutal air. Natalia dropped the logs. She should have gone inside. Every rational thought she possessed told her to go inside, bar the door, and wait until morning revealed either a living tiger or a dead one. She was 73 years old. She weighed 58 kilograms. She had no weapon within reach. She walked toward the animal anyway. Each step crunched loudly in the frozen snow. The tigress lifted her massive head and watched her approach with eyes that held something Natalia had never expected to find in a predator at close range. Not hunger. Not aggression. Something closer to pleading. When Natalia finally crouched beside her, close enough to feel the faint heat radiating from the animal's fur, she saw the wound, deep, infected, wrapped in frozen blood along the left front leg. The tigress whimpered. Natalia pressed her cracked fingers gently against the wound and the tigress flinched but did not strike. That restraint alone told her everything. A healthy wild animal would have taken her hand off without hesitation. This one understood, in whatever way wild things understand human intention, that the old woman kneeling in -71 degrees beside her was not a threat. She was a chance. Natalia made a decision that she could not entirely explain then or afterward. She stood, walked to the cabin door, and opened it wide. Warm air rushed out into the night like something escaping. She looked back at the tigress. Then she did something she had never done in 73 years of life in the taiga. She spoke to a predator like it was a person. Come inside. You will die out here. The tigress stared at her for a long moment. Then, with enormous effort, she rose on 3 legs and limped toward the open door. Pechka, the old gray cat, took one look from across the room and disappeared under the bed without a sound. If you are feeling what Natalia felt in that moment, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. The story is only getting started. Getting the tigress through the door had been the easy part. Natalia boiled water, tore strips from an old linen sheet, and cleaned the wound with the steady hands of a woman who had stitched her own cuts in the absence of doctors more times than she could count. The infection was bad, the flesh around the gash was dark and swollen, and the smell told her it had been festering for days. She applied the strongest thing she had, a bottle of medical alcohol she kept for emergencies, and the tigress roared once, a sound so enormous it shook the photographs above the stove. Then silence. Then the animal lowered her head back onto the wooden floor and closed her eyes. Natalia worked through the night. She wrapped the leg tightly, kept the stove burning at maximum, and sat beside the tigress on the floor with her back against the wall and Pechka eventually, cautiously, appearing from under the bed to sit exactly 1 meter away from the enormous animal with the dignity of something that had decided to be brave. By dawn, the tigress was breathing steadily. By midday, she had eaten the frozen fish Natalia had thawed on the stove. By evening, she was watching the old woman move around the cabin with those amber eyes, calm and unblinking, as if she had always lived there. On the 4th day, someone knocked on the cabin door. It was Grigory, the village's unofficial wildlife officer, a large man with a red beard and the permanent expression of someone expecting bad news. A neighbor had reported seeing large tracks in the snow leading toward Natalia's cabin. He had come prepared, tranquilizer rifles slung over his shoulder, radio in hand. Natalia opened the door 12 centimeters and blocked the gap with her body. "There is nothing here," she said. Grigory looked at the tracks in the snow. He looked at her. He looked at the tracks again. Natalia, those are tiger prints. Wild animals come close in this cold. You know that. He did not look convinced. But something in her voice, in the absolute stillness of her posture, made him hesitate. This was a woman the village had respected for decades. You did not call Natalia Ivanovna a liar to her face. He left. She closed the door and turned around. The tigress was sitting upright in the center of the room, watching the door with focused attention, her wrapped leg extended forward, her breathing even and strong. She was healing. And somehow, inexplicably, so was something inside Natalia too. 3 weeks later, the tigress walked back into the taiga on her own 4 legs. Natalia stood at the cabin door and watched her go. No ceremony. No hesitation. The animal simply reached the tree line, stopped once, turned her massive head back toward the old woman, and held that gaze for a moment that lasted longer than moments usually do. Then she disappeared between the black spruce trees and was gone. Grigory found out eventually. The whole village did. A researcher from Yakutsk heard the story and drove out in February to interview Natalia, who answered every question in the same flat, matter-of-fact tone she used to discuss the weather or the price of flour. The story spread. A journalist picked it up. Then an international wire service. Natalia did not enjoy the attention but accepted it with grace. Dmitry called from Yakutsk. Not on a birthday. Not on a holiday. Just called, his voice carrying something unfamiliar and long overdue. Mama, he said. I had no idea you were so alone out there. I am not alone, she answered, looking at Petchka asleep beside the stove. I never really was.